Hi, sixth graders. We are starting our Unit 9 unit called Applying Percents, and our topic is finding the percent of a number. So label your paper accordingly for this video. When we need to find the percent of a number, a few things that we need to know that you should write in your notebook. We know that we've talked about briefly that the word of means to multiply. So something of like 20% of 300 means we would multiply. So of equals multiplication. And then is, we've talked about, is the same as equals. So those you want to write down. There's two ways that we can find the percent of a number. We have two different methods. So I'm going to show you both, and I want you to have an example of both. So I would write two methods, like actually write those words, and then maybe set it up like this on your page. Fraction on one side, decimal on the other. And then this is our problem that, of course, you would want to write down. So finding 5% of 300. We know 5% is a small percent. So right away, reasonably, I know that my answer is going to be a very small portion of 300. So my first method, I can write it as a fraction and then multiply, just like it says right here. So I can write 5%. Remember, any percent, we can drop the percent and write it over 100, since percents are always over 100. And then we multiply. 5 hundredths times 300. Remember, if we're multiplying by a whole number, we put a 1 under it, so then we know that it's 5 over 100 times 300 over 1. I can cross cancel, which means I can look at my cross products and I can see that 100 and 300 can both be simplified. They can both be divided by 100, actually. So 100 divided by 100 is 1. 300 divided by 100 is 3. So now I can multiply. 5 times 3 is 15. 1 times 1 is 1. 15 over 1 equals 15. If you didn't do the cross multiplying up here and you just multiplied it straight across, you would still end up with 1500 over 100, which would also simplify to 15. A more common way, and the way that we will mostly use, is this second method where we write it as a decimal and then we multiply. So again, we're going to do 5% of 300. First, we write it as a decimal. So 5%. We put our imaginary decimal in here because there's a decimal after the 5, even though it doesn't show one. And then remember, to change a percent to a decimal, we move the decimal to the left 2. So go over 2. If there's nothing in there, then we add a 0. And of course, we added 0 before our decimal. So 5% equals 0.05. And then we do, which again is 5 hundredths. We would say 5 hundredths, which matches with our 5 hundredths right there. So 0.05 times 300, and you could put that in your calculator, and you would get 15. 15 makes sense because it's a small portion of 300. We would know 5% of 100 is 5, and then 100 times 3 is 300. 5 times 3 is 15, because 5% of 100 was 5. So then we know that that's reasonable. All right, let's do some more. We're not going to do all of these, but let's look at some of them. So I would like you to write these examples down in your notebook as I do them. So we're going to start with this, 40% of 120. And we're going to use our second method, just changing it to a decimal. So I know that I can change 40% by moving my decimal to the right, or to the left 2. So then it would be 0.40 times 120, because remember, of is the same as times. And then I'm going to put that in my calculator. 40% I know is a little less than 50%, and 50% of 120 is 60, so it makes sense that my answer is going to be a little bit less than 60. 0.4 times 120 is 48. Okay, let's do this one right here. 60% of 264. So again, I move my decimal to the left 2. 0.60 times 264, and we have 0.60 times 264 equals 156 and 6/10, which I'm going to leave, and that would be my answer. Okay, let's look over at this one. 37.5% of 16 is what number? So pause me, and this would be a good one to have an example in your notebook. So 37.5%, even though it already has a decimal in the percent, it's still in percent form, so we need to change it to a decimal. Remember, by changing it to a decimal, we have to move it to the left 2. So let's write this up here and write this in our notebook. Percent to decimal equals, and we'll just write, move decimal 2 to the left. Or you write it more thoroughly if you want to make sure you totally remember it. Maybe you want to write yourself another note, or maybe you want to say move the decimal 2 places to the left. Give yourself some examples, but this would be good to have down and circled. So we end up with 0.375, 375 times 16, because there's my of, which is my multiplication. I'm not going to round this. I'm going to leave it because I want all the numbers from my percent. So then we have 0.375 times 16, which equals 6. 37.5%, which is between 37 and 38% of 16. So it makes sense that it would be 6, because 50% of 16 is 8, and then this is, slightly less than 15%. It's nice to compare it to what we know so that we can make sure our answer is reasonable. All right, we're going to do one more. Let's do this one right here. Or one more on this page, and then we have a couple more pages. What is 0.25% of 900? So this is less than 1%. 0.25% is less than 1%. It's really close to 0%, actually. So it's going to be a small number, but we have 900, so it'll make it not teeny tiny, but it's a very, very, very small portion of 900. So 0.25%, I still have to move my decimal 2. I have nothing here, so I have to add zeros. So now it's going to be 0.0025, and then times 900. So 0.0025 times 900 is 2 25 hundredths. All right, let's go to the next page. So if we have a percent greater than 100, we know that a percent greater than 100 is going to be larger than the number that we are taking a percent of. So if we have 120% of 75, I know that my answer is going to be greater than 75, because 100% of 75 is 75. So we do the same exact thing. We start with our decimal right after the number, because there's no decimal, so right after the 0, I go over 2. It ends up right between the 1 and the 2. So 1.20, or 1.2, times 75, which makes sense because it's going to be larger than 75. So 1.2 times 75 equals 90. If you like to do the fraction method and you want to do that, that works even for percents over 100. You pause me and do these two and then come back and check. So 150% as a decimal is 1.5 times 20. And then 160% as a decimal would be 1.6 times 35. So we have 1.5 times 20, and we have 30. And then we have 1.6 times 35, and we get 56. All right, that is all that I have for you for this video. Make sure you bring these awesome notes to school with you tomorrow. Have a great night.